Have you ever felt like something was watching you from the dark, something that shouldn't be there, but is? Most people would call it paranoia. But what if it were inheritance? What if the eyes glowing deep in the forest were tied to your blood, your story, the secrets your family tried to bury with silence and rituals? For generations, tales of Nahuales, witches, and haunted woods were treated like folklore meant to scare children. But some of us know it goes deeper. There are hidden diaries, carved magical symbols on ancient doors, and unlikely protectors like pigs that guard more than just the pen. This is about a spiritual lineage, passed down quietly, generation after generation. Until it wakes up. This story isn't just rural horror. It's a warning. A chronicle about the weight of a supernatural legacy, the war between corrupted magic and ancestral protection. And most of all, how evil doesn't always come from the outside. Sometimes, it bears your last name. Get ready to uncover the hidden side of the world, the one that reveals itself in the margins of a grandmother's journal, in the whisper of midnight fear, in the dry snap of a branch outside your window. In this tale, every animal, every ritual, every symbol has a purpose. And the greatest danger might be waiting in the next fog. If you think you're ready to dive in, come with me. But know this: once the guardians awaken, there's no turning back. I grew up in a forgotten village nestled in the hills of Hidalgo, where the fog didn't just visit, it lived there. Every morning, before the sun had even settled into the sky, I'd carry buckets of scraps, bones, peels, cold entrails to my grandmother's pigsty. It wasn't just the stench that got to me. It was the constant feeling that something was watching from the twisted trees. The woods whispered. The wind carried more than dead leaves. They said the forest was haunted. I believed them. Even now, I can still hear the clatter of the buckets and the uneasy grunts of the pigs, like a warning that something else was always there. Back then, adults would whisper about witches, ghosts, and Nahuales. That word alone chilled me, even though I didn't really understand it. People said it carefully, like they were saying the name of someone who'd died but never left. One uncle once said he saw glowing eyes near the cornfield, and he never walked that path again after dark. I used to lie in bed wondering what hid beyond those trees. Spirits? Animals? People? Changed? The forest, always wrapped in mist, was a living wall, a portal that separated reality from things we weren't meant to understand. My grandmother, Doa Michaela, was a woman of few words and many secrets. She used to say, "Pigs can sense when evil is near." I thought it was just the ramblings of an eccentric old woman until I saw it with my own eyes. The pigs would suddenly stir, grunting and pacing, reacting to something I couldn't see. I started to realize that near them, I felt strangely safe. As bizarre as it sounds, there was something almost magical in their eyes. Years later, I'd understand they weren't just there for scraps. No one ever explained why I dreamed so often of people screaming in the forest. Nightmares of a dark presence watching me from the branches, of hairy hands trying to pull me out of bed. And the worst part? Sometimes I'd wake up with scratches on my arms. My mother brushed it off as imagination, but the night terror felt realer by the day. I started hiding coarse salt in the corners of my room, without telling anyone. It was instinct. Something deep inside me already knew my childhood hid more than childish fears. The elders in the village used to say, "Those born with the veil see what others don't." I used to laugh at that. But when you feel the forest calling your name, everything changes. That's when I began to sense that my life was just the surface of a much older story. Feeding the pigs, avoiding the woods, locking the windows before sunset, it wasn't routine. It was ritual. A quiet training for what I'd one day face, not just around me but within. My grandmother's cabin always had a peculiar scent: dried herbs, wood smoke, and something deeper, something ancient. The first time I stepped in alone, a chill raced up my spine, like someone had whispered in my ear. There were marks carved into the beams like little scars etched into the wood. They were everywhere, on the doors, windows, even under furniture. These weren't decorations. They were protection. They were magic. And not the kind from fairy tales. This was corrupted magic, designed to keep dark things out. Above the front door hung a special symbol, shaped like a spiral intertwined with thorns. The moment I passed beneath it, the air changed, like I'd crossed through a veil. I felt watched. Not necessarily by something evil, not yet. That night, I dreamt of the same symbol spinning in the darkness, radiating both heat and fear. I woke up in a cold sweat, and instinctively went to my grandmother's bookshelf. That's where I found the old notebook, worn thin with age, my grandmother's diary. The diary was written in two languages, Spanish and a blend of Nahuatl with what looked like runes. The pages spoke of rituals, spiritual lineage, symbolic sacrifices, and containment seals. Bold warnings stood out: never break the circle, the Nahual claims what is his. Each entry felt like a whisper from the past. I began to understand that the house wasn't just a shelter, it was a place of balance. And the magical symbols carved into every surface weren't just for show. They were there to hold back a force no one dared face directly. Over the next few days, I started to notice subtle signs. Candles in the living room snuffed out on their own. Sharp cracks echoed from the walls, like something shifting inside them. One rainy morning, I opened the window and found a circle of ashes in the middle of the yard, exactly like one drawn in the diary. My grandmother's words echoed in my mind: not everything that roams is spirit. Sometimes, it's family. I began writing down my own dreams and omens. I was learning to read signs, to listen. And the more I read, the clearer it became: my grandmother wasn't just an odd old woman. She was a witch. Not the costume party kind, but a guardian, a silent warrior against forces trying to break through the veil between worlds. The symbols I had ignored were survival codes. The house was a hidden battlefield, and me? I was next in line, whether I liked it or not. That diary wasn't just her record, it was my manual for survival. For years, I felt embarrassed to admit I had grown attached to my grandmother's pigs. In our village, animals were tools, nothing more. But over time, I noticed something different about them. It was in their eyes. A sharp, aware glimmer, almost human, like they knew more than I did. On misty days, they stayed alert, grunting low, staring into the woods. That wasn't normal behavior. It was as if the pigs were guardians, sensing the dark presence that crept nearby. I began watching them more closely. When I brought them scraps, some came straight to the gate, while others circled the pen, forming a protective perimeter. And there was one, a large, black, silent boar who never ate with the others. He just stood still, eyes locked on the edge of the forest. My grandmother used to say he was sealed, the last of the protector line. She said it like a weather report, but there was a weight to her voice, something sacred. It wasn't until I reread my grandmother's diary that I uncovered the truth: the pigs were part of a containment ritual. Each one bore hidden markings beneath its fur, raised tattoos made from ash and blood. They weren't just livestock. They were living seals, holding the Nahual at bay, the very creature that had once been my grandfather. That revelation turned my stomach. How could my grandfather have become a beast? And how did the pigs keep him away? The answer was terrifyingly simple: through corrupted magic, fueled by our own bloodline. Grandma explained that once a Nahual becomes corrupted, it doesn't die like an ordinary man. It dissolves into the forest, into the shadows, and waits. That's where the pigs came in. Fed with specific scraps and sealed with the right symbols, they created a living barrier. Each one was a piece on a spiritual chessboard, where one wrong move could open a path for the creature. The disgust I once felt turned into reverence. I began to see each pig as a soldier, silent, focused, ready for war. Now I understand why my grandmother was so strict about feeding them. It was never just about nourishment, it was a ritual. The repetition, the timing, the way the food was distributed, all of it was part of our ancestral protection. Even without fully understanding, I was being trained. Those pigs were my allies. Their behavior became a spiritual thermometer. If one of them stirred for no reason, I already knew something was coming from the forest. And in their eyes, I could read the warning. The Nahual had not given up. The night everything changed began like any other: overcast skies, biting wind, and restless pigs. I recognized the signs. When they started circling the fence, I knew something was wrong. I locked every door and window, just like Grandma taught me, and redrew the magical symbols with charcoal and coarse salt. The air grew thick, almost solid. A sticky tension, like something hungry was watching. Outside, the forest fell silent. No crickets. No rustling leaves. Just a quiet that screamed. Then came the scratching. First light, then like claws raking dry wood. I heard footsteps not human. Heavy, unbalanced, and accompanied by a growl that sounded like pain and fury fused. It was him. The Nahual, the being my grandfather had become, was trying to get in. The door shook. The windows rattled. And even though fear gnawed at my spine, I knew I had to stay calm. The seals were my only protection. Trusting them was part of the ritual. At the peak of the terror, a voice called out from nowhere. It was my grandmother's voice, or something trying to mimic it. It called my name, said it was cold outside, told me to open the door. And I almost believed it. Almost. But then the pigs began to scream, a deep, guttural sound that snapped me back. They slammed against the fences as if trying to break out. One even cracked a post. That wasn't panic. It was defense. They could feel what was approaching. The creature wasn't knocking. It was crossing over. The house started to shake. Shelves rattled, objects fell, and the old symbol above the door cracked. I smelled sulfur. Burnt fur. This wasn't a physical attack anymore, it was an energy clash. I remembered a line from the diary: if the creature comes on a moonless night, only faith and the completed circle can keep the door closed. I ran to the makeshift altar, lit the remaining candles, and, trembling, began to recite the containment verses etched on the back cover. The words spilled from my mouth like they weren't even mine. Then silence. A dull crack, like wood snapping from within. I opened my eyes. The seals were still intact, barely. Outside, I saw deep, clawed footprints in the wet earth. It was as if he had been pushed away by some invisible force. The pigs lay scattered around the yard, exhausted but alive. And me? I was trembling, crying but still standing. The Nahual had come. He had touched the edge of my world. But he hadn't crossed it. Not yet. The next morning, my mother showed up at the cabin like she already knew. She entered quietly, glanced at the pigs like greeting old allies, and sat at the table. After a sip of cold coffee, she finally said what she'd held back for years: your grandmother was a witch. And your grandfather a Nahual, corrupted by his hunger for power. I wanted to laugh. Or scream. Or run. But deep down, it all made sense. The fear. The rituals. The magical symbols. What had seemed like superstition was part of an ancestral pact. She told me our bloodline carries gifts that can heal or corrupt. Some use them for good, to keep balance between worlds. Others, like my grandfather, let themselves be consumed. The problem? Blood calls to blood. What flowed in his veins flows in mine. Then she said the sentence that changed everything: "You're what he wants." The next piece in the game. I felt my skin go cold. I was the target. The heir. The bridge between light and the corrupted magic he had become. My mother explained she had tried to keep me away from all of this. That shed left the village to protect me. But ancestral protection only works for so long. When the time comes, the legacy finds you no matter where you are. And in my case, it had already begun. The dreams, the omens, the way the pigs watched me, it was all part of the awakening. "You have the gift, my daughter," she said. "But you have to choose control it. Or be controlled by it." The choice was terrifying, but unavoidable. The Nahual wasn't just seeking revenge. He was seeking continuity. From that moment on, I dove deeper into my grandmother's diary. Inside were the lessons she never got the chance to teach me in life. I learned that some rituals only work when performed by direct blood descendants. That some symbols only reveal themselves through family blood. And that the pigs weren't just protectors, they could recognize the true guardian. Slowly, I began to understand my role. A spiritual lineage isn't a curse. It's a responsibility. One I never asked for, but one I now had to embrace in order to survive. The hardest part? Accepting that my enemy wasn't a stranger. It was the man smiling in old photographs. The one who, according to my mother, had once been gentle before he changed. Knowing that the Nahual had been my grandfather felt like carrying a shattered mirror in my pocket, part of me, part of a past I didn't choose. But now I was inside the story. Not as a victim, but as a key piece. The witch of a new generation. The guardian of the circle. And maybe, just maybe, the one meant to seal the cycle for good. That night, the pigs weren't the same. They were restless, but there was something else in the air, not just fear. Purpose. The old black pig, the one who always stayed back, stepped forward to the fence and let out a deep, thunderous sound from his chest. Suddenly, the others joined him. It was like watching a silent army take formation. I had never seen anything like it. The guardians had awakened. And even without words, they seemed to say it's time. On the other side of the fence, the forest stirred. Branches snapped. Heavy footsteps crunched through soil. The smell of earth and blood hung in the air. The Nahual was coming back. But something had changed. The pigs began to ram the posts, like they wanted to break through. And one by one they did. They burst through the fence and surrounded me, forming a circle between me and the forest path. That's when I realized the bond between us wasn't just symbolic. It was magical, deep, sealed across generations. They could feel my energy. And they were ready to fight. The creature stepped out from between the trees, deformed, a twisted mix of man and beast, eyes burning with hunger. But it hesitated. For the first time, I saw the Nahual retreat. Not because of me, but because of the pigs. They rose before him, swelling with a force I couldn't see, like something ancient was flowing through their bodies. Each one didn't just carry flesh, they bore living magical symbols, pulsing beneath their skin. And in that moment, I understood what my grandmother had built was a silent army, born of both love and terror, meant to hold back the darkness. The battle wasn't physical. It was energetic. The creature lunged, and the pigs answered with deafening grunts, stomping the ground like war drums. The old black boar charged first, biting at the air as if snapping some invisible thread. The Nahual let out a howl of pain and vanished into the fog. Then, silence. The kind that stretches. That holds its breath. The pigs slowly returned to the pen, exhausted but strong. It was like they had completed a cycle, a ritual of protection beyond anything I could fully understand. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat outside, staring into the dark, with the pigs around me like ancestral sentinels. I could feel the bond in every breath, in every glance. We were no longer just girl and animals. We were one magical force. A living barrier against whatever prowled the threshold between worlds. I knew the Nahual would return. But now, he would face something far greater: the strength of blood, the wisdom of the witch, the cry of the guardian pigs, and the power of what we choose to protect. The following days were too quiet. The forest, which used to whisper secrets through the leaves, now held its breath. But I knew. Once you've felt a Nahual's presence, you never forget it. He was still out there somewhere between the twisted branches and the thick fog, waiting. His first attempt had failed. But it wasn't over. Corrupted magic doesn't vanish with one defeat. It retreats. Watches. Rebuilds. And worst of all, it waits with the patience of the old. The kind of evil that doesn't need to rush because time is on its side. Even with the pigs around me, I couldn't sleep well anymore. The night fear returned, quieter now, like a poison seeping into my thoughts. Sometimes I heard branches snapping. Other times, I woke up with the weight of something invisible pressing down on my chest. One night, I opened my eyes and felt it, a gaze. And there they were, glowing eyes among the trees, cold and still. They watched for minutes and disappeared. It was as if he whispered, "I'm not done with you." And I knew he meant it. I started reinforcing the rituals more often. Lighting candles laced with onion peels, redrawing seals with charcoal and black pepper, whispering verses from Grandma's diary before sleep. Even when calm, the pigs kept their eyes sharp. They knew the war wasn't over. And I began to understand something crucial: ancestral protection isn't permanent. It's a shield that must be constantly renewed, like a spiritual muscle that atrophies if neglected. The forest still hid him. But the seal still held. I started carrying salt in my pockets. A small bony ant honey talisman dangled from my neck, one of the recipes I found in the diary. Whenever the air shifted, and the weight on my chest returned, it reminded me he's close. But unlike before, I'm no longer just fear. I'm the living memory of my grandmother, witch, warrior. I'm part of the spiritual lineage that walked through shadows and survived. And the pigs? They walk with me now. Silent. Steadfast. Like reversed shadows, bound by an ancient pact. Time passed. But the feeling never left. Some nights, the fog returns thicker, heavier. On those nights, I stay by the door, the pigs circling the house. I know the Nahual is still out there, maybe waiting for me to slip up. For a symbol to fade. For a candle to die. But as long as my eyes stay open, as long as my guardians are by my side, he stays outside. For now. Because in this world evil doesn't disappear. It waits. If you've made it this far, maybe you're wondering, what if it were me? And truth is, maybe it is. We all inherit something. Not necessarily corrupted magic or supernatural swine sentinels, but old fears, repeating patterns, stories we try to forget. The real question is, what are you doing with the legacy you carry? Maybe your guardian pigs are your choices. Your instincts. Little daily rituals that seem silly but protect you more than you know. Maybe your Nahual is a trauma, an addiction, or a presence you pretend not to feel. But what if you could awaken your own spiritual defenses? Strengthen your inner lineage with awareness, with study, with action? It doesn't have to be supernatural to be powerful. Life is made of magical symbols too, some visible, others hidden in gestures, silences, words. What you do with them defines whether you become another victim of fear or the strongest link in an ancestral chain. So ask yourself, what are you feeding today, your guardians, or your Nahual? I invite you to reflect. What silent forces have you been ignoring? What signs have you noticed, but chosen not to understand? And what if the forest around you is full of answers just waiting for you to stop and listen? If this story awakens something in you, don't let it fade. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and keep exploring this world with me. Because trust me, there's so much more hidden in the margins of reality.